Greetings, Wayman 29. This is in response to your second video on Paul the Apostle. In your first video, you made some general claims, and I responded to them. In this second video, you're laying down some reasons to support the claims you made in your first video. I was trying to decide what claims those were that you made in the first video. All that seems to come to mind are a recollection of Paul repackaging certain Christianities into and then combining his Judaism so that he can present this Christianity as a alternative, or opening it up to the God-fearing Gentiles. But I actually went back to your first video, and I could see at the 4-minute and 24-second mark you made this statement. Paul learned these theologies and put his own slant on it, combined with Judaism, to try to repackage it to God-fearing Gentiles. So the basic assumption being that Paul learned something about certain theologies pre-existing regarding a certain type of Christianity. And it is an assumption, and as you said before in your last video, these are all hypotheses. And I'd like to really make that point clear to everyone that it is all speculation. But I think too often than not, the so-called, quote, historical point of view tends to tout itself as being the factual account. From what I gather, your views are agnostic. From what I understand, you tend to say, that you're not bound by any theology. You're not letting your theology frame your historical perspective. And as I said before, you may disagree with this, but I would have to say that yes, you do. And I would say to an extent, everyone has theology, whether their belief is in no God, then they're having a atheistic philosophy or some sort of approach. But in your case, you're definitely looking at this from a naturalistic, quote, naturalistic point of view, in which we're not sure if God is intervening in history, and so therefore the more the theology is bound up in an agnosticism where, well, pretty sure there's a God or something, other, than just nothing, and that there is some sort of order or, destiny involved here. But it's all really in a naturalistic sense, and all of these things like miracles and God intervening in human history, well, that can just all be explained away, So, in that sense, the theology is agnosticism, and from a naturalistic viewpoint. So, having said that, you go on to state how the religion of Judaism became the religion about Jesus. And again, I would have to say that this is a faulty viewpoint, because it assumes that Christianity and Judaism are two separate things. Now, don't get me wrong, they are, but when we say, that we have a certain Judaism, and that is another point I'd like to say, is that there are Judaisms. There are many Judaisms within the first century as well, and not just many Christianities, or if you want to call it Christianities, but there were many Judaisms in the first century, and that there were Messianic viewpoints, and that Judaism was very Messianic centered. And so those who would believe that Jesus happened to be the Jewish Messiah suddenly are coined as Christian. Well, it's really a matter of stating, the Messiah. It's like saying, how could the Messiah? It really doesn't make sense, because the Messiah is a Jewish figure and he's central in Judaism. So how could we say, oh, the religion of Judaism and has nothing to do with the Messiah of Judaism? It's a wordplay. It's a Greek mindset to separate Jesus from Judaism, to separate the Messiah from Judaism, and that's what it's really all about. It's modern scholarship. You've mentioned a couple. I'm familiar with Raymond Brown. You mentioned Bart Ehrman. These are scholars. They're very good scholars. And I'm familiar with them, and they've done a lot of good work. And there's some viewpoints that are very liberal as well. And I'm not surprised at many of your stances, because those are the stances of the majority of scholars, biblical scholars, that these are the majority of opinions which I really stand opposed to, because I don't see how they make sense. And again, they're all hypotheses, and then I have my reasons for rejecting those hypotheses, and I set forth my own belief in other speculations. So, saying that, we move forward to your bullet points, in which you talked about, and the first one is, Christianity is best understood as beginning not with the teachings of Jesus per se, or with his death and resurrection, but with the belief in his resurrection. Once his followers came to believe he had been raised from the dead, and so had been shown unique favor by God, they reconsidered his teachings. And again, you know what it is, in the last 50 years, well actually longer than that, modern scholarship has still been bound up in the idea of Christianity, or Christianities. The problem with it is that they look for a beginning point, and it's in thinking about how it got started and coming up with their own speculative reasons on how Christianity got started. Because let's face it, Christianity today is very little like Judaism today. But the reality is that, yes, Christianity eventually became a religion set apart from Judaism, but it was the early believers in Jesus who were Jews, and they were believers in a Jewish Messiah. Okay, so in regard to his death and resurrection, the death and resurrection of Jesus, Bart Ehrman makes a point to state that it was the belief in his resurrection. So I'm not sure why he likes to point that out, but probably has something to do with the fact that Bart Ehrman probably didn't believe that he was raised from the dead, which is fine. He doesn't have to believe that if he has, whatever viewpoint. I'm not as familiar with Bart Ehrman, as I am with Raymond Brown. But at any rate, he says, he had been shown unique favor by God. So then they reconsidered his teachings. But actually, if you recall, in the Gospels, many of his followers believed that he was the Messiah even before he was crucified. So, because there was a concept there that they were looking at him as a Messiah figure who was perhaps not as divinely anointed, and then later came to see that this was the Mashiach, the Messiah. But aside from our beliefs in who Jesus was, his followers believed him to be a Messiah or a Messiah type even before he was crucified. And there's this constant plugging away at, there was this Christianity, and that it was being pulled away from Judaism, and that it was that these Jews really wanted to just step out of their Jewish roots and start this new religion called Christianity, when that was not the case. No, they believed in a Jewish Messiah, so why should they change their religion? No, they were Jews, and that was the case. Now, your second point is they begin to claim that he, that is Jesus himself, was the Son of Man, and had anticipated that he was not simply close to God, but was the unique Son of God, and was not simply their leader and master, but he was Lord of the whole world. I don't really have a problem with that statement, but again, the premise is, these are some of the reasons that Christianity was started. And so I would say, as a believer in a Jewish Messiah, I would say there's this constant, Judaism versus Christianity outlook here. Well, if you're talking about Christianities, well, there was certainly this more Jewish style of a Messianic Judaism of those who believed in Jesus. So, although I don't have a problem with this bullet point here and the whole concept of Christianity having a beginning in a certain sense, I think that I do need to point out that there is a constant versus this versus that, Christianity versus Judaism, when we need to start really thinking, more along the lines of Judaism and Messianic Judaism. And so let's move on to the next point. They also reflected on the meaning of his death in light of their scriptures, finding passages that referred to the death of God's righteous one and taking them to refer to Jesus. And of course, this is an argument from a more modern Jewish perspective, but actually, when you're talking about the righteous one, or a righteous one, or a Messiah, or a Mashiach, are we talking about the many? There were many different messiahs. Moses, of course, was a Messiah. Okay, so anyway, in this point here, finding passages that referred to the death of God's righteous one and taking them to refer to Jesus. Well, it almost sounds like Bart Ehrman is just saying, "Oh, well, see, they took those passages incorrectly and applied them to Jesus. They shouldn't have." Although he doesn't state it right out, but the wording, of course, is in that manner. And I like to point this out because a lot of these books are, these are the books that the teachers are giving their students in Bible college, and there's no talk really about these matters, but a lot of the major Catholic universities, I happen to know firsthand that Raymond Brown is standard material, and so all of this stuff is being filtered into the Christian colleges, under the auspices of historical scholarship or historical criticism. These are Christian colleges, and so you would think they would have a viewpoint that would be Christian. But at any rate, I could get into an argument about, if Jesus was the righteous one, but I thought I would just mention that the wording alone is simply a claim. It's simply a statement by Bart Ehrman, and that's all it is. Moving on to the next phrase was, these Christians then developed the idea unknown to Judaism that the Messiah was the one who would both suffer and die. I would have to say that that is the most erroneous statement that Bart Ehrman makes, because it just is. And the idea that the Messiah would suffer and die is very much a Jewish idea. It may not have been an idea that was throughout the entirety of Judaism, but it certainly was part of all of the Judaisms, of all of the different viewpoints of Judaism. And to say that it was not is a flat-out lie, or it's just ignorance. So, yes, the idea was a developing idea. And in his book by Raphael, the Messiah Texts, by Raphael Patai, in the introduction on page 32, I'm just going to read this section here. Actually, he draws a parallel between Moses and the Messiah. And rather than read out the entire thing to you here, I will read a section of it. But basically, the same way that Moses was not allowed to enter the Promised Land and that Moses had to die, there's a parallel drawn between Moses and the Messiah. In other words, just as Moses died, so will the Messiah die. And so it says here on page 33, the Messiah too is haunted, pursued, and overtaken by the problem of the Redeemer, who is not allowed to see, let alone taste, the fruits of his labors. The Messiah too must die before his mission is completed. But he also must live in order to sit on the throne of David in Jerusalem. And so there's another scholar, and I don't even think